Mayor Walsh recently came out with an update to the city's strategy for climate readiness. The aim is to make the city carbon neutral by the year 2050. That includes some new construction as well as standards and incentives to adapt what's already built. To share some thoughts on what that could mean is the principal and co-founder of Rhodey Architects, Eric Robinson. Thank you very much for being with us, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, you live in Dorchester. You got a front row seat of what's going on with the sea levels, don't you?
I do in a couple different ways. So I'm an avid sailor as well. So I have my boats at Savin Hill Yacht Club right on Morrissey Boulevard. And, seeing Morrissey Boulevard underwater and our yacht club underwater in the sort of high tide moments is sort of where I really see it on a daily, more sort of, my house is not sort of on the waterfront, but certainly know of the issues. Yeah.
Now, a lot of us in Boston, we think of rising sea levels, oh, that's just that dumpster in the Seaport District. That's not going to happen here. But what's the mayor thinking? Because I think the mayor is looking beyond that, isn't he?
I think so, and I think that, when you hear about, I think, sort of the statistics, and I'm certainly not a statistician, but, it talks about sort of, it sounds minimal in a lot of ways. An inch higher here, 2 inches here, over time. And I think it sort of seems to be downplayed a little bit from that respect, whereas a lot of the issues, they compound on themselves. It's sort of about high tide cycles, it's about wave action cycles that are not just about sort of the sort of smaller increments of the sea rising, but sort of also sort of the natural kind of devastation that's sort of by just the sea itself, and sort of in times of turmoil and storms are sort of what exacerbates a lot of those issues.
Well, I imagine in your field, you're not just sitting there waiting for the elected officials to tell you what to do. What has your company been doing so far?
So, I think it's sort of been at the forefront of both my business partner, Kevin Diebler, and myself since undergraduate. So a while ago when we were friends, we went to a school in North Carolina at North Carolina State that was an environmental design and architecture degree. So we learned early on that sort of respecting the environment and working with the environment when we're designing our projects is really at the basis of it. And I think now that we're in practice and working in a city that does sort of have some of the pressures associated with sort of climate change and what we're seeing, hasn't necessarily changed how we're thinking about our projects, because I think sustainability has always been inherent how we design our work from the beginning. So there's a ton of things that are associated with it. It's all about solar orientation, shadowing, all the sort of different aspects that sort of get baked into a design. We sort of really start with those at the forefront of all our design projects. If it's on the waterfront or if it's inland, it doesn't really matter for us. We have a process.
So solar orientation, shadowing, I guess that's got to do with heating bills?
It has to do with heating bills. It has to do with solar gain from the standpoint of cooling too. And it also has to do with just environmental concerns associated with living in a city and living within building environments. The city is working very hard to sort of assess projects and buildings through their environmental department that is taking a look at sort of, buildings and what we're proposing and how does that impact how we live in a city from the standpoint of, again, shadowing, wind studies, tunnel aspects of it. It's about sort of how we live and the experience that we're having within sort of the context of an urban environment.
I don't know if it's about your company in particular, but I imagine some companies out there, they're not trying to prevent the water from coming in and reaching up a certain point in their building. They're trying to deal with that. Is that what you do?
Yeah, I think it is, and it certainly depends on a handful of the physical characteristics of the project and the site it's located in. We just actually finished. We submitted on there was an RFP by the city for 24 dry dock land down sort of by the Design Innovation Center, and part of that proposal with our development team was the first floor, finished first floor, is a plus 4.5 feet above the adjacent street. So it's something that, while it was a proposal response, we had to take into consideration sort of the early design sort of concepts of building, at a higher floor level, and then it's the sort of result of moving systems and sort of all the infrastructure up above a high water mark. So in order to sort of protect those. So in some ways, you're creating a sacrificial floor that can sort of be wet and then be dried out, and you're not sort of losing sort of precious space that sort of has put a lot of money into it. So it's really sort of rethinking the ground plane and the way that the building sits on the ground and interacts with its network or in the neighborhood.
This is BNN News, and we're talking about how to build and adapt for climate change with Eric Robinson of Rohde Architects. Eric, another important word for you is sustainability. I guess that could mean materials, but I guess that could mean other things. What exactly does that mean?
So I think we talk around the office a lot. Sustainability is often not glamorous or sort of the really sort of interesting things that get sort of the notoriety. It's not, we sort of have a term we throw around, eco-bling is what we call it, where, and you'll see it around in different aspects where it might be a single wind turbine on a roof, or the Museum of Science has a lot of examples of different configurations of a, so those are really sort of, I think, one-offs to kind of draw attention to this idea of sort of wind power. The reality of it is building now, it's sort of within the bones of the building. It's not glamorous. It's better insulation. It's better vapor barriers on the windows, on the walls. It's sealing and doing better job making sure that windows don't leak. So it's sort of a little bit in the bones and the body of the building, but it's really what sets forth the sort of better efficiency of the mechanical systems and sort of all the different aspects of it. Recycled materials are really almost a given at this point, I think, in terms of the industry. It used to be that it was all about what's the recycled content and what's the sort of, that aspect of it. That is almost a little bit behind us, I think, in some way, at least from our perspective as at my office. We think that's almost the bottom sort of given. You have to do that.
Now, as an outsider, I'm thinking in recycling, and that's good for the planet, but come back closer to your work on a project. Why is recycling so important?
So, I mean, I think because anything we do, and we all know that buildings create a lot of embodied energy associated with them, whether it's within the day-to-day operations of the building in terms of the obvious things of lights and mechanical systems, to what does it take to fabricate and manufacture the steel in the building or the exterior skin of the building. And so I think thinking about the whole carbon footprint of a building does sort of help you sort of try to sort of understand it on a broader and bigger sort of basis.
Now, of course, another thing going on with a lot of the new buildings is there's an attempt to make them transit-oriented so people won't be driving cars and needing parking spaces. As an architect, you cannot control the location of a building, but other than that, how do you squeeze some sort of, transit orientation?
That's a great point, and we're seeing it all over the city, and I think, some of our projects, for example, right in my own backyard, and we did a project right at the Savin Hill T Station where it was a renovation of a small existing building, and then we did an addition to it for an additional restaurant space and then some residential units with no parking. And, I think the concern was in the neighborhoods about sort of you're putting some units in with no parking, and I think we respect that concern generally. But here we are now, 2 years past completion, and there's really been no issues associated with the project. It's not a huge project, it's 14 units, but zero parking, but it's right on top of the train station. So I think when we have the opportunities and we have a site that is adjacent to train stations or mass transit, we need to really take advantage of that, build additional density and reduce parking to either none or come up with some creative ways to either have more rideshare capabilities within the development. We have some of our clients that are actually looking at buying cars that would be part of the development and use as a shared sort of like a enterprise share or something, something of that nature, or also incentivizing tenants with reduced T passes or free T passes to use those sort of modes of transportation. So we're seeing all different kinds of things that are, they're marketing from the standpoint of wanting to make sure the units are full, but they're also having a benefit in terms of the environment from cutting down on some transportation.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Eric Robinson from Rohde Architects. We'll have more news in just a moment.